Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Now you're in for a treat as we're taking a little different take on a traditional Ask Me Anything. Today, we have a customer who's letting us ask the questions. I'm Mindy Rodenberg, Field Marketing Lead for the United States here at Squiz. And I have the absolute pleasure of hosting this AMA session with Pam Burton from NCSC and Steve Morgan with Squiz. Our topic is around how the National Center for State Courts utilizes technology to improve visitor experience and administrative efficiency while achieving organizational goals. First, I'd like to introduce Stephen Morgan. He's the president of our U.S. operations and has over 20 years experience in digital strategy. He has spent much of that time working with all levels of government, including judicial systems. I'd also like to welcome Pam Burton. Pam is the web content editor and manager with External Affairs and Communications for NCSC, the National Center for State Courts. She's in her 15th year managing the website experience for NCSC. Pam's work is key in helping NCSC to make a difference for the courts they support. The National Center for State Courts promotes the rule of law and improves the administration of justice in state courts and courts around the world. We've given ourselves a very ambitious target of 30 minutes, so it certainly is going to be a quick fire, but anything we don't cover, we'll certainly get into the following session, so rest assured it will be answered. Without further ado, I think we should jump into our first question. Pam, can you give us a brief overview on NCSC and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. Well, I joined NCSC in 2008. It has been in existence since 1971 in various forms. I believe, from what I've heard, it was originally sort of the wish and the dream of Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren Burger in the 70s, who wanted to create an organization that existed purely to support and help and improve the state courts, not the federal system, not the Supreme Court, but the state courts. And that's what NCSC does. I mean, it has evolved over time. It is always evolving, but we have at present a consulting arm, which actually travels to courts all over the country and assist with whatever they believe their needs are in helping and supporting them. We have a training arm which provides judicial training, state court administrator training, a research arm with many PhDs with social science backgrounds who can actually do research into the kinds of social issues that bubble up sometimes out of nowhere and have an impact on the courts. So that's kind of the entity. It is a nonprofit. Our leadership, our board is drawn from the current leadership of two judicial associations, the Conference of Chief Justices, which is an association of all of the chief justices from the states, and the Conference of State Court Administrators, same thing for court administrators. So we really get our direction and our leadership from the leaders of the actual state court systems, which kind of helps drive and direct our work. I've worked entirely in the web space. I get a lot of questions, a lot about whether I'm an attorney. We have a lot of those, but no legal background whatsoever, just a web management background. And I've led NCSC.org through, I guess, moving to its first content management system, moving to another content management system, many major and minor redesigns of the site along the way. And I would say that the one way that our organization and our websites differ from a lot of more straightforward industries and businesses is that our focus can change on a dime. And I think everyone had that experience in 2020, right? So whatever your focus was pre-pandemic, suddenly things had to change. But really, that's almost normal business at NCSC because different issues become, court management issues, and that can happen and it can change very rapidly. And so our products have to pivot and change frequently. So.
Yeah, and Pam, I think it's that when I first met you at NCSC, you'd sort of come to the end of the road with one of those CMSs. So
yes.
You had some migration to a new platform, but the thing that was unique that I saw when speaking to you about it was that you have all these very, very different subject areas and a lot of people without technical skills involved in servicing them. So you had a lot of sub-sites going on. So we worked through a lot of things around that too, and these special interest areas. Can you talk us through a bit about that and how the move to Squiz helped with some of that? Because
yeah, sure. Well, it's interesting. We have sort of the mothership main website, ncsc.org, which, you know, tries to do what most websites try to do, which is communicate and, you know, explain and offer products and resources. But we have, at the moment, I often lose count, but it's somewhere between 26 and 30 microsites, which are not as deep as ncsc.org, not as content rich necessarily, but you're right, Steve. It's just such a range of different topics, all based on issues that have come before courts that they need help with, and the work that we do in those areas. So it can be anything from jury management to you know, different federal related justice programs. Court statistics is probably our major microsite apart from ncsc.org, because NCSC has been essentially the only entity to gather statistics on the work of the state courts since the 70s. So we own that data and we offer that data to the public, to the courts, to the media. But I mean, we even have a microsite for, I'll be shocked if you've never heard of this, but warrant and disposition management. Don't ask me to explain what that is because I'm not the subject matter expert there, but we have an entire website about that gets fairly decent traffic from the people who work in the space of making sure that warrants are disposed correctly in the court sphere.
That's another interesting part of it, though, isn't it? you have these. You're providing, like, in that what you just said there. You're providing like content, data services, because you're the only ones that collect the data since the 70s, which is amazingly valuable. The data service and some functionality to people. Is that right?
Yes.
So they are delivering quite a package of web services effectively, and they're non-technical staff, right? So they have to do that via the CMS, which is quite
right. Exactly. It is largely non-technical, and you know, but that becomes, in a sense, that's part of the problem. I wish we had better technical solutions for the vast amount of content that we have, and that is what we're looking to address in the next 12 months, really, is to find, you know, better, faster ways. The main complaint that we hear from users is, I know that you have this because somebody told me that you had it, or I've seen it, I saw it 2 years ago, and I can't find it. Which is very understandable. It's not user error. It's just that we have such deep content that things get created, they get placed prominently, and then they get moved as they age. And so maybe the person can't find them where they used to be able to find them. So that is kind of the website's major issue. And I would like in the next year to find better technical solutions to solving that problem for users.
excellent. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about a bit about this in the past, but like I guess utilizing more of the search capabilities as part of the DXP to help turn the search power internally as well for some of the internal users and stuff, and maybe make some improved navigation for them around search to help them find stuff. That could be one way forward, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what we're looking at is what we could do. What can we do with metadata? Because our metadata game has never been particularly strong. It has gotten stronger with the help of the Matrix content management system, because that made it easier. But what can we do with our metadata on content, our dating of content, and particularly our filtering of content that can make it easier for a user to come and either using search or using filters, drill down to what they need a lot quicker than they can do now.
Yeah. Okay. And then after facing some of those challenges, then we also got hit by COVID, and everyone came online.
Yeah.
And turned everything on its head. And how did that change things? As being a national center in the middle of quite a lot of these things that came up, how did that change things for you? How did it change what you were being asked for, and how did you respond?
Well, I mean, again, we're here to address what the pain points of the state courts, and it is a vast and gross understatement to say that in 2020 courts didn't have a lot of remote workers. It's just not a way that courts operate. You know, if you work in the justice space in a court, you get up in the morning and you go to the court. And your work is there. So just a very basic thing was courts were not configured once the lockdowns began to have staff working remotely. So that had to happen nearly instantaneously. So what the National Center had to do, and I was not directly on this team, so I can't really speak to all of the intricacies, but our board said, look, you know, the work of the courts cannot be held up by having to go remote. Case processing and cases must still flow and be adjudicated, even if everyone's at home. How are we going to do that? So in terms of NCSC staff, they kind of became what we called the Rapid Transition Team, I think, RTT. And it was a real diverse group of talented people, very different subject matter experts. I'm sure all of our technologists were involved directly, but they were tasked to just start talking to courts, find out what they were doing, find out what they needed, and then try to create, you know, almost instant white papers, briefing books, summaries, you know, even if it was just in PDF form, just get together the information that we had so far about how the courts were grappling with this and what they saw as initial successes in the virtual realm, because essentially court proceedings had to become either some form of hybrid remote or fully remote. And that's not a completely, you know, new animal by any stretch of the imagination, but the scale, you know, to the extent to which they had to scale that up really, really quickly, that's where we kind of had to help immediately with the technology solutions and the technological advice to get them the hardware, the software, the platforms that would help them go virtual as fast as possible. And, you know, one minor line of, well, I won't say it's a minor line of business, it's an important line of business, but we, like many entities, I think, we run our own conferences. We help courts and associations manage their own conferences. And of course, all of the conference space during that pandemic period, we had to face every time a conference was looming. Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be in person? Can it be in person at all? For a long time, they couldn't be in person. So we had to pivot and just kind of, like, again, it wasn't the creation of anything brand new, I don't think, but it was massively scaling up quickly the ability to say, well, you know, we used to offer 5 sessions at this conference virtually, and now it has to be the entire program. So that was a big change that people had to adjust to.
Pam, could you give us an example of an area on your site where you had to rapidly incorporate change in order for courts to find answers to their new pandemic needs?
Sure. Well, the rapid response team, what we quickly discovered within the first 6 months of 2020 is that you know, these people did their work and they talked to the courts and they gathered the information, and we just had a fire hose of content coming to the site. So I think this URL has changed a number of times in the last 2 years, but it landed eventually on ncsc.org/pandemic. And that is actually a filter landing page that allows users to look at everything that the team created and filter down to what they need. Do they need bench cards? Do they need advice on, of course, generally a lot of our work breaks down into civil, criminal, and appellate. So there are filters for that. If you're an appellate court and you only wanted to look at the pandemic related appellate content, you could get to that quickly. And one other way that our business, again, it wasn't brand new, but our webinar creation or schedule, I suppose. We'd always done webinars because one of the great values of NCSC to its constituents is getting people on the phone from different courts in different states and just letting them talk to each other and share their experiences. Well, but our webinar game went from, one every couple of weeks to multiple webinars a day doing that. So you can see on the pandemic landing page that you can, if you search by materials, you can choose just webinars and get representation of every single topic that we had a webinar on during that period. Where these were, in nearly real time, people in the courts trying to discuss the directions they were headed in and whether that was the right way to go. And, our experts and other experts in the courts sharing what they knew and what they had used so far that had been successful. So webinars were very key. And, they haven't, in the last 2 years, we were just talking about this, we're not doing quite as many as we were doing last fall, but it's still a very brisk part of our business. And I could not have, again, that's sort of the fun at working for the National Center is you can't predict, the directions that we may eventually go in. So, and the technologies that we may eventually use. So that became a huge part of our work at that time and currently.
You're as a National Center, you're smack bang in the middle of the enterprise communications game, like your communications team, and one of your channels got wiped out, like the in-person communication got wiped out. So it was only digital and voice left. And I imagine the administrators trying to use those two channels to answer everything as this all was changing. Have you got any plans to simplify it for administrators further and to take advantage of some new tools that we have to help them with that process?
Well, I will say that just the very base function that you have built into Matrix, I don't want to overlook it because I think compared to other CMSs that we had used, it really helped during this period. But just the idea of having components that do certain things that can be dragged onto a page quickly, populated with content. One of the topic areas that came up fairly early within 2020, 2021 was the question of evictions. People across the country were losing their jobs for pandemic related reasons, not being able to make their rent and becoming unhoused at a very high rate. And we've seen the courts grapple with that kind of thing before, where a certain area of adjudication or court business caseload just becomes much higher. We saw it with foreclosures, housing foreclosures back in the early 2000s. But eviction diversion, the question of, so what are the ways that people might not have to be, evicted? What can the courts do to help with this problem? Both, help the landlords and help the tenants, and just find resources to keep this from being an enormous social and justice problem. So we did, I think this is all gathered now at ncsc.org/eviction. Just the landing page where you can see that we've added on, and we were able to add on entire sections to that area on ncsc.org as more resources became available to help the courts deal with the eviction related caseload. So, and just, like I said, it's not high tech to me because of course I'm used to the content management system being what it is, but being able to build something from scratch within an hour and make it live. And, we really, during that time and always, we try not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we, if we had content, we try to get it up and available as quickly as possible. So things just build over time, and having those components that do, very basic but very useful things in organizing content for users was a huge plus. I don't think we could have worked that rapidly in those pandemic specific topic areas that were bubbling up without that capability.
Right. And I mean, you guys are so good at doing that, and it's always good to watch. And that eviction example is because that was playing out in real time in the newspapers and in the media, everything. And this is one of the things I love about working for government, because and government related entities, organizations with purpose, because your purpose helps give us purpose. and it also means that we can hire a certain type of person too, and who like to do social good, and to watch that play out and to have our small role in helping people get through that and helping you service those requirements was something we were proud of too. So
sure, well, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So leading off of that, Pam, what do you consider the next step in your digital experience evolution over the next 18 months or so, with the big changes that you've already undertaken and then the ones you're currently undertaking?
Well, I think what we're working towards, and it's still kind of in the sandbox at the moment, but like I said, findability is key. I think we're going to have to we did a little bit of user interviews, user feedback with a consultant in the middle of last year. The trouble with our website and that sort of discovery and research is that some things have changed since then. So a lot of the feedback that we got in some areas is not as important as we thought it was at that time. So I think we have to do a whole lot more large scale work with our users just to find out, the specifics of when you say you can't find what you're looking for, tell us more about that. What are you looking for? How did you try to find it? How is search working for you? I mean, Funnelback has been a big success for us over what we had previously. And I think people who use search are largely happy with it, but we need to kind of extend that search capability, not out of the search bar on the site and more into the page level user facing tools that people can actually engage with to try to drill down to what they need. So I think we need a lot more recent user feedback and user intelligence on why people are coming to the site and what they want to do. And then we'll take it from there in terms of building pages. And again, I can talk about the metadata a little bit more if you want, but that would be our next move, to really kind of rethink how we build the content, because we know that we're always going to have no dearth of content. We have a lot of content coming in from all of our divisions, from all of the work that they're doing, from all of the engagements that they have in the court. And just the question of, of being the one, communications and external affairs is the one place that kind of has a global, or tries to have a global overview of all this work, because the divisions don't know what each other are doing. So to try to organize that in a way that could be more driven by search, more driven by metadata, and more automated on the site, without requiring people to remember what the URL was and how the page is put together and what's old on the page and what's new on the page. I kind of want to leave all of that behind and have something more automated that can kind of surface that content automatically without individuals having to be involved.
So having all of your information and services online, still encapsulating that historical data, but better findability for what's most current and most easily accessible for those coming to find it.
Sure. And it's not always the newest stuff. Sometimes it is, but we have a lot of content that has some legacy and some weight to it, that may be 8 or 9 years old, and so that becomes kind of the value judgments have to take hold here. Some things you retain, a lot of stuff we put in our archives, which unfortunately are not that well integrated with the rest of the website. But yeah, we would like to have landing pages on the topics that we do considerable business in and have considerable information in, have those landing page in a certain sense run on their own, based on, we know that we wrote this newsletter, or we created this page about a new program that's available to the courts for whatever topic, and by tagging it a certain way, we'll know that it shows up in the right locations on the site and in site search. That would be ideal.
And so tell me about the tiny chats that were developed and how that came to be, and how some of this information may be included in some of those discussions.
Sure. Tiny chats are the brainchild and the love of a very dynamic duo of people that we that are court consultants of ours, Zach Zarno and Danielle Hirsch. And basically, they are tiny chats. They are just short Zoom video interviews, usually with people in the courts, court administrators, and also in justice adjacent fields. But you know, the variety is astonishing in terms of what they tackle and what they talk about. So, for example, we were talking about the eviction diversion work that we've done. I believe there's an entire Tiny Chat collection of those kinds of short interviews that began in the pandemic and continue on, where Danielle and Zach just speak to people in the courts about their programs and their work with eviction. And it's been very successful because they're speaking primarily to a court audience and a judicial audience, but also to attorneys, also to the public. You know, public trust and confidence has always been sort of an issue with the courts. You want people to believe, and we poll people frequently about how they feel about their ability to have a case go before the court and get justice. So I think Tiny Chats is you know, one way to kind of swing that bat and try to help people who aren't judicial experts in any way understand a topic in a very down to earth way.
And in a bite-sized way too, with
Exactly.
how we are searching for and retaining information in those soundbite type avenues. Yes. Seems to be proving very successful for a lot of organizations, and yours obviously included.
Yes. And I think their tone is great. It was an adjustment, I think, for some of our constituents. There is a certain gravitas about the courts, you've probably noticed, and you know, a sense of formality, which Tiny Chats pretty much throws out the window, but in a good way. And they have a lot of fun, and they're not afraid to make fun of themselves and to just be a little goofy. And sometimes that helps get the message across. So it's been very much a departure for us, but a good one, I think.
That's wonderful feedback to hear as well. Sounds like they've really connected in the relatability factor, which helps help build that trust as well that you're looking to do.
Exactly.
So Pam, we've talked about a variety of topics today. There tend to be crawl, walk, and run scenarios for any digital change project. What is one of the crawl, walk, and run approaches for making the transition in NCSC's case?
Well, I think, like I said, we're going to have to start with an updated and an improved taxonomy for all of our content, which, you know, if you manufacture stuff and sell it online, that's kind of my dream sometimes, because the taxonomy seems so easy, right? I wouldn't even really mind having to do Amazon level taxonomy, because at least it's pretty straightforward in terms of the content there. Our taxonomy can be very challenging, because often courts use the same terminology to mean different things. So we have to be careful about how we label things, because perhaps in Puerto Rico, that label makes very little sense compared to in Kansas or Wisconsin. So, you know, the labels that we use for our work and how we describe the processes of the courts, we have to get to some sort of common agreement on that before we start putting labels for buckets of content across the site. A lot of times the conversations just internally within the National Center itself can be really interesting in that regard, because we'll have disagreements over what means what exactly. So we've really got to start with that taxonomy to figure out how our labeling and our both the public facing labeling and the back end metadata, how that's going to work. And then once we've got that structure, just apply it to some sort of automation, like I said, for, you know, main top level landing pages. because really, leaving it to, say, a mega nav on a website doesn't even scratch the surface of what we've got. So we will be employing, I think, more, greater complexity within funnel back, within site search, and also at the page level to try to automate what could be brought onto a page purely by the metadata and the timestamp of individual pieces of content. And then if we actually get that far and have a working prototype that more or less does that, then, along the way, we have to show that to constituents, show that to people internally. It'll take some governance changes, which again, it is, I know governance in most organizations is a question of herding cats, and we're no different. But when you have divisions that are so independent of each other the way we do, it's even more challenging to kind of get everybody understanding the direction that we're going in, and how, maybe getting things to the website is going to be different going forward than it has been traditionally. And then it's just the staff training question, because we'll be doing a much less highly formatted, highly designed presentation, I think. And we'd have to test this out with users, but I suspect that one of the reasons users are confused on our site sometimes is because we have a lot of differences and not a lot of uniformity and consistency across different sections. Projects get funded in different ways. They get staffed by different people. And inevitably, even within a templated and component-laden content management system, ecosystem, those projects come out looking differently. And I don't think that that's always a plus for us. So we'll be looking at what elements could we make consistent across projects that would help users as they're looking around to understand exactly where they've landed and exactly what they're looking at and what the content is. And if it's not what they want, then they can move on. But at least to make that more findable, and again, not relying on them finding the right section and the right landing page on their own. So that, there's definitely a governance element to that that's going to have to happen.
Fairly understood. So it sounds like you have this apples to apples information that you're wanting to all come in agreement on yourselves, and then you're disseminating it within organizations and court systems who are dissimilar in as many ways as they are similar. So it's not a pure apples to apples rollout. Correct.
And every project is different. So much of the work of the courts, it's not a cookie cutter kind of business in a lot of ways. And we have to be sensitive to that. But at the same time, in terms of, the individual projects can be very different in what resources and content we're providing, but the ability to find it and understand where it is on the site, that's what has to be simplified so that anybody can do it. And they don't have to, call us or know a person. When I first came to the center, a lot of the web traffic was, I suppose users started their web search by calling someone that they knew at the National Center, which is great that we have, we've had that level of like customer security where people know our names and know people here, but people would call first and then ask about where they could find such and such on the website. Not the model. I think that's a model we've mostly left behind at this point, but obviously something that it's not the way we intend to do it going forward.
So that brings us to a great point in wrapping up with a final question. And what would be the end goal of your efforts, Pam?
Well, I think we've made some governance changes and some site design changes that attempt to, integrate the content that we have on different platforms to get it more onto the site and more available to people. So I think that sort of continued work to show people, you get people to our archives if they're looking for something that's an old project, get people to our Vimeo platform, which is where our webinars and our tiny chats are hosted. Find better ways to bring all of this. We have learning management systems. We have a ton of email newsletters that, again, you can find them in the newsroom, but maybe those need to be tagged in a way that they can show up with other content that's in a project somewhere, or even on a microsite somewhere. If we've written about that subject in a newsletter, those things kind of need to mesh in a way that they don't currently. So to try to create more content, write more individual, unique and timely content, and get that distributed across all platforms in the right places. That would be a very big move forward, and I think really helpful to our users.
Thank you, Pam. This was incredible detail. Steve, would you like to jump in here as we wrap up our conversation?
I mean, to wrap up, I mean, to me, the relationship we've had with NCSC, it's built on one of our core principles, which is this concept of come as you are. And what that means in the Squiz context is you can bring your current technology, your current problems, current opportunities, current staff and capabilities, and we'll just seek to understand all of that and then work with you on a plan to tackle the problems and opportunities in the right order, not just try and wholesale replace everything. And that takes into account who the organization is, who you are, Pam, and what your budgets are. And I think we've worked together really well on that. It's a really great example of the come as you are philosophy. We tackled migration first, then the sub-site problem, then COVID hit us, and now we've got a searchability and findability problem to face, which is cool. And we'll look forward to working on that too. So yeah, I think it's a great example. So thanks, Pam, for being our customer the last few years, and we really enjoy working with you.
No, I've enjoyed it very much, and we've come a long way with Squiz from where we were just a few years ago. So we are grateful for that.